Good morning, buongiorno. Good morning from the Milan Music Week. Here, my name is Enzo Mazza. I'm the CEO of FIMI, the Federation of the Italian Music Industry. And we welcome to this panel, this international panel involving the directors and CEO of some of the major markets around the world. From Australia to Canada, passing through France, United States, United Kingdom, and Germany. We will discuss today about the current situation in any of these markets, looking into the way and the key trends of the music ecosystem from various perspectives, market development, government policies, with a short update on the impact of the pandemic, which is still a big trouble for most of the country, and what we expect in 2022. So let me introduce you to Frances Moore, the CEO from IFPI, the International Federation of the Recording Industry Worldwide, for an opening remarks. Thanks, Frances, and welcome to this virtual meeting on the Milan Music Week.
Thank you, Enzo, and hello everyone. Buongiorno a tutti. I'm delighted actually to be involved again in the Milano Music Week. In my opening address last year, I said how much I was looking forward to actually being in Milan for this year's event. Well, COVID has dictated something else, and so it will be for next year. But we will definitely have a physical meeting in the near future. I also mentioned last year that despite the pandemic and the incredible challenges that the industry was facing, that I was pretty much optimistic about the future. In fact, I think that optimism has been vindicated because the results for 2020 show that the recorded industry revenues were up 7.4%, and the forecast for 2021 is similar. So the industry continues to do well and to face the challenges which have been exacerbated by the COVID situation. The industry saw solid growth across all the region, all the world, and not just one particular region. And the industry continues, the companies continue to expand their footprint geographically across the world. And as their international organization, we are doing the same. We have recently opened in the MENA region, Middle East and Africa. We are opening up in Vietnam. We now have office in Sub-Saharan Africa, etc. And I think that as an organization, that's the role that we have to play, which is that we underpin our companies worldwide to make sure we're helping to develop their right environment for them to do business. Now, I mentioned that IFPI is a global organization, but the truth is our strength comes from our national groups. They're really our secret weapons. They're the eyes and ears of the industry and the actors at national level. This particular group that you're going to hear from today has been meeting quite regularly over the last number of years, and particularly during the COVID crisis, in order to be able to exchange best practices, learn from each other, and make sure that they were in a good position to be able to go to their governments to help to get support packages for the industry. And I think that's something that has been appreciated right across the territory. We have a number of national groups today, so they've all only got a very short time to talk to you. So let me pass first of all to Annabelle. She's the Chief Executive Officer for the Australian Recording Industry Organisation, ARIA. Annabelle, I know you had the ARIA Music Awards last night, and it's already well after 11 p.m. where you are in Sydney. So thank you so much for turning up today, really, or this evening for you. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to hearing from you. So Annabelle, with that, I pass over to you.
Thank you, Frances, and ciao a tutti della bellissima Sydney. It is very late here. It's 11 p.m., but that's fine. I'm so happy to be here speaking to you tonight. I joined ARIA only in February this year. I actually had not worked in the music industry before. I came from a long career in commercial television, before that in politics, and before that in copyright. And when I joined the industry was enjoying the growth and still is enjoying the growth here in Australia that Frances mentioned. But there are also a number of large challenges that our industry is facing. Obviously, the COVID impact has hit the music industry the world over. In Australia, we had particular challenges because the policy that our government adopted early on was to try and keep Australia completely free from COVID, which was fantastic for quite a long time, but it came at a great price. And the price was that our international borders were closed for, I think, almost at least 18 months. And not only the international borders, but Australia is made up of 6 states, and the state borders were often closed. And in fact, most of the state borders are still currently closed. So that has had a dramatic impact on live music because artists have just not been able to tour. We have had no international acts coming to Australia, and that obviously has a huge impact on local artists and festival lineups, etc. So the industry is in a very, very difficult place. I discovered fairly quickly that music was kind of starting from behind when it came to the COVID, recovery effort with government and government support here. We were starting behind some other industries like film and television and even radio, because those industries in Australia are very heavily regulated, as they are around the world. And particularly the film industry and television is very heavily subsidised. Music is not particularly either of those things here. And so we didn't have those deep connections with government that really enabled us to get ahead of the COVID crisis. And we found that we were falling behind. So that was definitely something that I felt coming from television had a big impact on the industry. We did get some support, but really it was very limited. The international borders have only just opened, but unfortunately the state borders are still closed. So I can travel to Italy, which I'm longing to do very soon, but I can't travel to the north of Australia. International acts, obviously, and even domestic acts can't tour until those borders open because it's just not economic, especially given the size of our vast country and how far away we are from all of you, unfortunately. In terms of growth that Francis mentioned, yes, we're enjoying the same level of growth, pretty much exactly around that level. We've suffered from public performance revenue because a lot of, during the lockdowns that we've had, the extensive lockdowns, obviously cafes, bars, restaurants, gyms are closed. But the industry is starting to come back to life. We had the ARIA Awards last night, which is our national awards ceremony. It was half live, half digital. Interesting genres dominated the awards for the first time were hip hop, R&B, which is very unusual for Australia. Usually it's rock and pop, which was very exciting. The last thing I'll touch on before I hand over is the other big challenge that I've faced in Australia since coming into this role, and that is some real big issues around culture, appropriate behaviour, equality for women, and representation of minorities in particularly the business side of the industry. There's been a lot of talk about things that have happened, behavioural standards in the industry, a lot of focus, a lot of media, and we've had to really look at what we need to do to address cultural change, but also to look at the underlying reasons why this behaviour is happening. I feel that, this is happening in every industry, certainly in Australia. There's been a lot of emphasis in politics, banking, a lot of other industries. Music has a particular vulnerability to this sort of behaviour, given some of the places where we work, studios, festivals, all that sort of thing. But there is a real willingness in this industry here to have a look at these issues and see what needs to be done to get more women into leadership roles and more people who are Indigenous into leadership roles, and to start changing the culture in this country. So it's very exciting. I'm really thrilled to be in this job. I love the industry so far. So yes, thank you very much for having me, and have a great night.
Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you very much for joining us. We know that it's so late there, but we are really happy to have you on this table and enjoy your speech and your consideration. So I now back to the other side of the Atlantic. I think Patrick Rogers, the CEO from Music Canada, can also update us on the evolution there, on the development in Canada.
Perfect. Thank you, Enzo. Thank you for this opportunity to share what's happening in Canada. In Canada, our vaccination rate is very high. We're at 76% of the entire population, with boosters now being made available to older people and the most vulnerable. But both social and professional events are beginning to come back. This weekend, I'll be attending the Canadian Country Music Awards, which will be the first music event of its size to take place in person since March 2020. Like elsewhere, live music was decimated, and the venue ladder has struggled to recover as provincial governments have placed ever-changing regulations on live music. Also, practically anywhere you live in Canada, it's easier and more economical in normal times to tour north-south through the United States than to tour east-west across our vast country. With borders closed until recently, this has made recovery for touring acts almost impossible. But on a more positive note, Canada recently reached a new streaming milestone. Last week, MRC data reported that Canadians had streamed over 2 billion streams a week for the first time. This number puts Canada in a very positive streaming position for the size of our country. And we think that this is a great number to highlight because it captures all licensed music, all services, or licensed services, all languages, all size of artists, big and small. And most importantly, it's 2 billion a week. It's such a huge number that I've really enjoyed sharing this with policymakers as we all try to get our heads around it. Politically, the most interesting thing in Canada is that we're having a couple of debates about the future of culture and the digital economy that other countries have been having, but we're having them all at the same time. As in elsewhere, political decision makers' views on big tech have shifted across almost all party lines. There's a consensus on the need for the biggest players in the digital economy to pay their fair share of tax, and that includes sales tax, but also levies that our domestic companies pay. But we're also having the discussion about how to pay for the production of Canadian content, because the previous source of revenue for those projects were hidden levies on television cable bills, and cable bills are quickly becoming extinct. And lastly, concerns about discoverability of the content that the government pays to produce are also leading to a desire to reach into digital platforms to ensure that truly Canadian content can be found where people are looking, listening, viewing. And I'd say that each of those three conversations are worth having. In fact, we support efforts on each of them. But as has happened elsewhere in the world, when the three conversations are had at once, I think the average Canadian can be left feeling like there's a little too much interest from bureaucrats in their TikTok view. As we look ahead to 2022, our biggest interest is to make sure that we are a part of these conversations and make sure that all political decision makers see the value and importance of the digital economy to culture. Thank you again to Enzo for inviting me to take part in this, and we look forward to hearing more from everybody else.
Thank you, Patrick. And now we will remain on this continent, and I hand over to the first market in the world, that is USA. So Mitch Glazier from the RIAA can now update on what's going on, and in particular in the last few months, and also your perspective for next year. Thank you, Mitch, and welcome to Milan.
Thank you, Enzo. Thank you for having me. Good morning from Washington, D.C., everybody, where it's Thanksgiving, and it's tradition here on Thanksgiving Day to say what you're thankful for. So I am thankful for this great music community and all of these executives. As Francis said, we get together regularly, and it's a terrific group, and I learned so much from each of you. Like Canada, our vaccination rates are similar, and live music is starting to come back in the United States. We are having our first in-person award shows, like up north. And as we pull out of the pandemic, the live business is starting to show signs of recovery, but it still has a very, very long way to go. During the pandemic, we spent much of our time trying to lobby for funds for musicians who fell through the cracks, quite frankly, because they don't have jobs with employers who pay into unemployment insurance, and they weren't registered with offices that would send them checks in order to be able to survive. And so adapting to that kind of relief during the pandemic was an incredible effort of the entire music community, and everyone came together to do it. Streaming during the pandemic rose, and I think, as Francis said in the beginning, revenues in the United States, like global revenues on the recorded side of the music business, grew substantially. In 2020, streaming grew to a $10 billion business in the United States, and streaming revenues made up 83% of all of the revenues from music in the United States. And revenues in the first half of 2021 grew by another 27% in streaming. And so we are on track for major growth this year as well. There's a new high of 82 million paid subscriptions in the United States, which we have never reached before. And just in the first half of this year, Americans listened to 840 billion streams. That's the highest ever in a 6-month period. Music contributes $170 billion to the US economy and supports 2.5 million jobs. It's an important industry, but when it comes to being protected, even though it's high profile and even though it drives other businesses that are very important as well, like the tech industry, it is much less protected than the tech industry. And it also isn't recognized for all of the content that it provides. So in 2022, there will be a major push to look at the laws protecting music, which were written in 1998, and to try to update the implementation of the protection, especially when it comes to standard technical measures, to try to make sure that the laws surrounding music match the time where music is driving all of the innovation in the United States. So we're looking forward to a very active year in 2022. I'm looking forward to learning more from this great group as we move forward. And I'm looking very forward to hopefully being in Milan sometime when Milan Music Week is taking place after this year. So thank you, Enzo. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you in particular for joining us in this particular day. I know it's a bank holiday there, so I really appreciate your attendance to this event. Now we go back to Europe, and we go to France with Alexandre Lasch, the CEO of SNEP. SNEP is the French Federation of the Music Industry. Thank you, Alexandre, to join us, and nice to see you here.
Thank you, Enzo, and grazie alla FIMI per l'invito. Well, in France, market developments are, of course, comparable to those in the rest of the world, sometimes with a slight delay. So, a brief market overview. At the end of 2020, the French market size represented here in France approximately $1 billion in trade value, stable compared to the previous year, despite a marked drop in CDs and vinyl, but also in performance rights, particularly important in France, with a 20% decline, of course, linked to the COVID crisis, and in particular to the closure of cultural stores in the spring and at the end of the year. During this year of 2020, streaming continued to grow at the same rate as the previous year, up 18%, and the sector's turnover is now driven 72% by digital and 28% by physical, a composition exactly the opposite of that of 2013. As elsewhere in 7 years, the French market has been totally reconfigured. It is obviously subscription-based streaming that is driving this reconfiguration. And for the first time in 2020, more than half of the music market revenues actually came from streaming formats. But physical products are particularly resilient in France. CDs should do well this year compared to 2020. And vinyl, as elsewhere, is even a victim of its own success. And the challenge for vinyl is in anticipation. Supply times are getting longer, and it is often necessary to be ready 6 months in advance to ensure production. Moreover, the French market is particularly marked by the vitality of its local production. Every year for the last 5 years, 19 of the 20 best-selling albums of the year are local productions, sung in French. And this is also true when we look at the top 200, 80% of which are local artists. Rap and urban music, generally speaking, is particularly popular here in France, as it is in Italy, if I'm not mistaken, and it represents more than 50% of the top 200 and a third of the total music consumption. But beyond numbers, 2021 will be marked also by significant legislative activity for our sector, with the implementation of the copyright directive, as is the case throughout Europe, but also by a new anti-piracy law that strengthens the missions of ADOPI, the competent administrative authority in France, which will merge next year with the broadcasters regulator to form a super regulator, if I may say so. Climate laws also, with particular issues around the financing of culture, and in particular, an adaptation of the private copying levies in favor of reconditioned devices. Also around the implementation of recycling channels for unsold goods, or the regulation of advertising, in particular in the polluting sectors. You know, our sector, the music market, must anticipate these changes for obvious reasons, but also because its revenues are partly based on the advertising revenues from broadcaster and streaming platforms. Another important legislative issue is the financing of the National Music Center. This public institution, created just before the pandemic, has passed the test of fire, if I may say so, by becoming the receptacle of all the exceptional support of the state to the music sector, and especially live music, of course, during the pandemic. It must now consider its cruising speed. Its budget is based on a tax on ticket sales, the state's budgetary contribution, but also the voluntary contribution of the collective management organizations of our sector. And the Parliament has just begun to discuss how this funding could be supplemented so that recorded music can find its full place in the institution. And in this respect, we as SNEP, we support the idea of a possible tax on audio equipment, AirPods, headphones, connected speakers, etc., because this sector benefits from musical creation without financing it. And conversely, we oppose the idea of a tax on streaming services, which would undermine the fundamentals of a return to growth for our industry. As you may know, the French presidency of the European Union will start in a few weeks. These issues are obviously among our priorities, as well as the legal framework applicable to internet intermediaries that is adapted to sustainable development of streaming offers. But we also believe it is still vital to continue to support physical distribution, notably through a reduced VAT rate, another important issue at EU level. Thank you, everyone, for your attention.
Thank you, Alex. I must say that France was always a great champion for the cultural industries, a great supporter for copyright, and member of the strong alliance also with Italy on supporting the copyright directive and the implementation. So now we go on the other side of the channel and ask Geoff Taylor. Geoff is the CEO of the BPI, the British Pornographic Industry. Thanks for joining, Geoff. And I hand over to you for an update from the Brits.
Well, thank you, Enzo. It's lovely to be in Milan. This feels a little bit like traveling to see my friends, and it's certainly the closest I've come for a very long time. There's so much to talk about, so I'll try and keep it sort of top level. But the themes in the UK, in terms of the market development, is pretty similar to the rest of Europe and indeed the US. So our growth was hit last year, obviously, by the pandemic. We're recovering. The growth rates in the recorded music sector look pretty healthy this year. But of course, we still face the problems related to touring, and the problems that arose from the pandemic for musicians in the UK were obviously exacerbated by the fact that we'd left the EU. And there are complex issues to be navigated regarding visas and work permits for artists who want to travel and play live in the rest of Europe. So the whole industry is working with the government to try and address those. We had a positive development a few days ago when at least some of the problems have been resolved for UK artists traveling to Spain. But there's a very complicated issue called cabotage, which is the rules that govern the number of stops that lorry drivers are able to make, truck drivers are able to make when they travel across Europe. Those are still impeding the ability of UK artists to organize tours. So there's a lot of work to be done to try and get the touring business back on its feet and restore artist incomes that way. So that's kind of the first priority for us. The second thing is I think a result of the streaming market. You know, the streaming market is a global business, and British artists have always done really well on the world stage. When it comes to streaming, about 1 in 10 streams around the world are by a UK artist. Obviously, if you look at the charts right now, you know, we're flying pretty high with Adele's album and Ed Sheeran, a number of British artists doing well. So it's a real priority for us to support British music culturally around the world. And that's where our government, we think, can do a lot more. We have a scheme that supports the independent sector, independent artists, independent labels, to promote their music overseas. The funding for that has been cut back. And we think it's absolutely time for government to do more to support British music overseas. Not only is it very important to the way Britain projects itself to the world and the UK's soft power, but it's a great investment because we get about a 12 times return on government's investment into this touring fund. So the Music Export Growth Scheme, we'd love to see government invest in more. As the recorded music market doubles in size over the next 10 years, you know, we want the UK to enjoy its share of that. And it is getting more competitive all the time. You know, I know, Enzo, that Italian pop is doing really well at home, and that's the case in a number of the European markets. The domestic repertoire is really strong. So we have to work harder to compete for people's attention and get them listening to British music. So that's a big priority. A third area for us is something that I think all industries need to think about, and Annabelle touched on this, which is, you know, we all have responsibilities to be positive social actors. There is an issue in the music industry, I think globally, with the level of representation of women, like in most industries, in executive positions, but also in terms of the representation of female recording artists and what percentage they make up in the charts. Enzo, I know you've been looking at that in Italy. So we're looking at what we can do in terms of research to better understand the drivers why there are fewer women in the charts than men, and try and address those barriers and make sure that the industry is fully representative. A lot of work's already been done in terms of diversity of the industry for ethnicity. There's still more to do on that. There's a big program of work right across the industry to try and make sure that we're addressing barriers there as well. And we take that very, very seriously. And finally, in the UK, there's a lively debate going on around streaming issues. We need to engage even more in that debate. I think there's a lot of lack of understanding around how the streaming economy works. And I think in particular, we need to do a better job demonstrating just how many artists are succeeding in the world of streaming. We have thousands of artists who are hitting streaming milestones in the UK that are higher than ever were the case for CD. We need to tell that story, and we need to engage in the debate and find more common ground, I think, across the industry in terms of what are solutions that really will work for the future. So we're very engaged in all those things, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. Thanks, Enzo.
Thank you very much, Geoff. And I remember that for those who are listening to this panel, want to get more information on the countries that have been involved in this panel, they can go on the IFPI website and download the Global Music Report. And also a recent, very interesting report, Engaging with Music, released by IFPI and was presented here at the Milan Music Week, with really interesting insight on the consumer side of this market. The copy of this versions of this report are also in different languages. I think French, Italian, and Spanish, I think. So now I hand over to Germany. Germany is the fourth country in the world in terms of market share, and is really an important market in Europe. The first market in Europe, if now that Geoff has left the EU. But so I hand over to Florian for covering Germany. Thank you, Florian, for joining.
Danke, Enzo. Hallo, guten Tag aus Berlin. For us, I have to say we are the fourth market and we are behind our European friends. And so we consider this also being a tradition that we have a European spirit here. If I jump in what you just heard from the colleagues, let's talk COVID. You can see the disaster. Our vaccination rate is very low, close to 70%, but not yet. You can see the disaster, and I hope that we can avoid the horrible pictures coming from your country some time ago. And I have to tell you that we are really afraid here in Germany. One thing I have to add, if you look on the German map and you map where the most right-wing people have voted, you can see that exactly this matches with the highest incidence in Corona. So this is a horrible picture of my country, and we have to be better than that. This hits the industry. This hits all the industries, and that's very horrible. So, talking about the figures, we see good growth. We see healthy growth, even in a market like Germany, where traditionally you knew that the Germans stick to physical product. The Germans stick to their CDs, and for a long time, this gave us a strong position and a good stability. Over the last 5 years, the market flipped to digital, and we see good growth. And we expect this year to finish very well. So this gives us a very special responsibility, and you know us for that as well, because we take care of the digital market, and we take care of the trust in the digital market. We take care of safeguarding the digital market where we can. And this means that one of our priorities, of course, is to attack illegal business behavior where we can, including streaming fraud, which is quite an issue in Germany. And this is, if you will, this comes with a strong digital market that you cannot stop and just watch streaming growing, but you also have to be careful that this stability is safeguarded. On the other hand, if we talk politics, we have a lot of work with a very bad implementation of the European Copyright Directive. This means that there is troubled waters ahead, that we have to also be very careful with all the flaws in the law, because this has impacts into the real world, into the business, into the way we work with partners, including collecting societies, including artists. So we have a lot of work with that. And last point, and maybe most interesting point for you, just yesterday the new government was announced in Germany. And as you know, we don't switch our governments as often as you do. For us, this is the first new government since, or not, the first new chancellor since 16 years. The era Merkel is over. We had new governments in between, but not with the same frequency. So in this environment, we see a new coalition from liberals, social democrats, and Greens. And just yesterday, we learned that we will have a green culture minister, and most likely also a green vice chancellor running the economics ministry. So when we talk about what we do, we always are part of the creative industries. And so I expect that the whole discussion about creative industries will get a new spin. And when I heard Geoff, this is pretty much what we also feel here, that there is a lack of understanding. We have to explain not only what our industry does, we have to explain how the creative industries work. We have to explain how partnership in the modern world works. We have to explain that not everything is digital, that there is real work from real people, online and offline, and that there is a real role we play in the society, in a transforming society, in all the debates which we see, and we are living this. Our companies, our member companies transformed their business, they transformed the way they work, they transformed the professions which are in the heart of the industry. So I'm pretty much looking forward for this new government, and I think this is going to be an inspiring discussion which is ahead. Also, as you know, with a European footprint, because German governments tend to think very European. And so I expect that here in this round, we will have a lot of exchange also with you, Enzo, on the way forward and what this means for our European creative industries, including, of course, us, the music industry. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Florian. As most of you have said, this our industry is a content industry, is now strongly digitalized, and depends a lot from the protection, in particular copyright protection. As I think this is the main issue that we are always facing. We are implementing the copyright directive in most of the country. Italy just implemented in the recent weeks, and now we are also focused on the DSA. There is another really important, the DSA and the DMA, two new pieces of legislation at European level, where all the countries are involved in a strong lobby. Is a really an important piece of legislation. In particular, the DSA is addressing the ISP's liabilities, ISP's responsibilities, and the rule of the intermediaries, and the rule of the anti-counterfeiting and anti-piracy groups in fighting illegal content online. Regarding Italy, just to update also on this side, I can tell you that we are following the same path as the countries here. Digital is growing very fast. Italy lagged behind for many years in the increasing of digital market share, but during the pandemic we saw an incredible increase, in particular in subscription. Now we have a conversion rate from free to streaming, which is growing very fast. This is a positive attitude from Italian consumer, and we expect this year the market growing again, and next year becoming really one of the most important market in terms of digital content, in terms of streaming music. There is a positive mood on the Italian music, as you know, from this incredible success of an Italian rock band. I think it's the first time in history that we got a group like the Måneskin breaking into the charts around the world, and this is a positive message for all the industry. So there is a lot of focus now on exportation. Italy was known for the exportation of their music, but in particular for the traditional music, traditional Italian bel canto, as we said here. But now there are the success from the Måneskin is confirming that there is probably no burden in succeeding around the globe, and thanks to streaming, this is a great opportunity for local content to exploit around the globe. The day after the Eurovision, I can confirm that we saw the band being the top 10 charts in 38 countries around the world in less than 24 hours. So this is an incredible confirmation of the power of streaming and the power of digital. And you can only imagine what it would be exporting physical content, physical CDs around the globe to reach the record stores in countries like from Estonia to US, from New Zealand to Canada, and so on. So that is something that we are working on, international exploitation of Italian music. The government was supportive during the pandemic, also in general for the music business. As you know, live, as most of the country here, live was strongly affected. It's still strongly affected because we don't have 100% occupation of the venues, so it's a big issue for the winter tours of the artists, because they cannot reach the standard occupation of major live venues, in particular the big live venues, because they have limited occupation to between 50 and 60%. So this is impacting a lot the live sector. There are some support from the government from the live sector. There have been support also even for small and medium record labels and collecting society, which was good. And in particular, I can mention also the tax credit for developing and nurturing artists that has been updated by the Italian government, and now has been extended to any record music production. So the old tax credit was limited to the first, second, and third work. Now it's available for any kind of production. I can only add something regarding the culture bonus. The culture bonus, this contribution for young teenagers, which is now also available in France and in Spain, was introduced by the Italian government. Is based on a 500 euros for a bonus for 18 years old teenagers. You can buy cultural bonus, and has a great impact also on the sales of music, in particular physical music in Italy. So that is more or less our update on also from this side. At this stage, I can thank you all for joining, and also in this particular and complex situation. I thank you again also for the update from your countries. I thank you in particular also Francis for being here today, and I hope that we can join again in physical in Milan, in the Milan Music City, which is now part of the big network of music cities around the world. Thank you again. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.
Milano.